Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, and thank you for watching IT Pro TV, helping you to level up and learn anywhere you go. I'm your host, Zach Memphis, for this episode of pfSense 2.4.4 Open Source Firewall. pfSense Advanced Configure Captive Portal. That's what we're doing right now. Would you like to join us? I bet you would. And Ronnie Wong is here to show us the way. Ronnie, good to see you.
Well, good to see you too, Zach. Thank you again for joining me as we now continue through our advanced types of settings that we need to think about. And we are up to this point where we want to talk about the idea of captive portal. Now, captive portal is an unusual aspect of something that we can set in pfSense. And the reason why is that most of us have probably used a captive portal and didn't even know about it. And what I mean by that is if you've connected in over a hotel wireless access, and you've come across that link, as soon as you connect in and you open up your browser, it shows you, hey, you have to agree to this before you can log in.
Right.
You used a captive portal. If you've done the same thing, maybe at a coffee house or at a fast food place where you also use their wireless access, you had to click on a checkbox or something, make sure that you agree to their terms of services, then you've used a captive portal as well, okay? Well, you can set something like that up on your own network using pfSense if you choose to, okay? So by doing something like that, you can essentially do the same things that hotels and even the fast food joints that I was talking about. What they're trying to do is limit their liability, okay? They're trying to say, hey, you're welcome to use this, but remember that we don't hold any real responsibilities and you shouldn't be doing anything illegal on the actual connection itself, okay? So by doing something like this, it can help you out. Now, just because it's there, it doesn't mean you have to use it, okay? Now, the reason why I want to actually make sure that we understand is it is useful in situations like that. But what if you're actually in your own business and you did set up a guest wireless access point for vendors that may come in, okay? Or guests that you have in the building, but you don't want them getting access into your own private network, but you want them to be able to have access. Well, you can set this up without ever doing anything like that as well, and it's all up to you of whether or not you choose to or you choose not to. But if your company has some sort of legal liability, well, then that you have to kind of think about. So you have to think about whether or not it's worth it to do it without it or whether you want to do it without it. Either way, I'll tell you the truth, I don't like using it at all myself because I think it adds a burden to try and troubleshoot when you don't really need it, especially in a small company. But if I had a wireless access point such as at a coffee house, well then, yes, this is something I do want to set up because it actually allows me to ensure that when somebody connects in, let's say that Zach connects into my wireless access network or my wireless network at this point, if I do something like that and Zach now gets some type of virus on this computer, he can't bring the computer back to me and say, I got this connecting over your wireless access point. So, Ronnie, you now owe me a computer, okay? So that's something I don't ever want to happen. So if I do something like that, I got to actually think, okay, that this is probably a great place to do it. Now, if I know, okay, if I'm doing this for a small network, I probably won't even set this up. But if I know that there's going to be a lot of people on it, it's probably something that we might need to consider setting up. But it can be a little bit tricky depending on how you tend to do things.
So in a very real sense, Ronnie, and you've already touched on it, I know, but what does this help us to do? Okay. Why do we want this?
Right. So we want it, okay, if we're actually going to do this, like I said, for the reason, fairly simply, legality is the reason, okay? But usually, Zach, though, the reason why people want to do this in pfSense is because it gives them the ability to do it in pfSense. And what I mean by that, it's a novelty at times, right? Oh. Can I get this up and working and doing what I want to do? Most of the time, it becomes annoying, and the reason why is that if you troubleshoot something like this, and it doesn't work, it can be very frustrating, okay, to try and figure out what part is, it's not working. And if it's not working, well, what do you do if now you do have a ton of people on your guest network saying, I can't get access into the internet, and I was told that there was wireless access. So I would kind of try to weigh out whether or not it's something that's worth me putting onto my network or not, and actually trying to do that. Because if not, what you actually end up doing is you'll go ahead and take it down anyways and then allow people access. And you just got to kind of remember what, is that actually worth it? Or do you want to actually take all the time to troubleshoot and do what you need to? Okay?
So in your opinion, for a Soho, this probably is not the best solution.
Well, it not necessarily the best solution, but it may be a necessary solution, especially if you, like I said, if you have a ton of people connecting in, probably a better solution. But it does take up resources, which also means that on your pfSense box, if you're already kind of loaded at capacity, you may not want to do this at all. Okay, so it's up to you. Now, for us to set this up, there's a couple of different ways that we can set it. Actually, 3 possible ways that we can set this up. One, with no real authentication at all, Zach. Okay, when we start talking about something like that, with no real authentication, what we want to do is to bring up essentially a web page that when people connect the network, they won't be able to connect anywhere else, but they'll actually be able to connect into the network, and then it will just give them a web page, and they'll simply click a button after they read the agreement, or if they choose not to read the agreement. It's up to them, but they have to put a check mark, and they have to click a button to be able to gain access, and so they can do something like that. Okay. The second option, of course, is simply logging on to the system, and that means you have some type of database of users that are able to log on here. Okay. Now that database can be stored on pfSense. Not so good of an idea if you have a ton of users that you have to keep track of. So pfSense gives you the ability to use a logon server as well, such as Active Directory. You can use Radius to connect into LDAP directories or Active Directories to house the database there, and it just retrieves the information and allows that to happen as well. Okay, so pfSense has information like that for you. You can even establish that by adding an additional package to help you out to do so. Okay, so all of that's actually very possible. The third option is using vouchers. Okay, now voucher systems, at least since 2.24, which is probably the last version that I really did have to kind of set up at least for a show. It worked. It didn't work. It worked, and it didn't work. So for one reason or another, to me, it was fairly inconsistent. But they might have improved on it now. But what we're going to do is we're just going to use the simple authentication methods because I know that I can get relatively consistent results with this. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't issues that you have to face and try and figure out. But overall, though, this is what should end up happening. So, Zach, does that sound like fun?
It sounds like a great plan, and I can't wait. Let's move forward.
All right, so let's go ahead and dive into some of the configuration settings that we need to get into, okay? So before we get started, it actually depends on what we need to do. So there's a couple of options that you can do here, okay? So at one time in earlier and previous versions, okay, what you had to make sure of is that you already had essentially a HTML file that you could end up using. So let's take a look at my screen, and this will help us out. So I have a custom HTML file here. Now, it doesn't mean you have to do that. In 2.4.4, which is the edition that we're using, it has a default template for us to be able to use. So you don't have to do it at all if you choose not to. And my recommendation right now is to use the defaults, okay, to actually work. Some of the older templates that you might find on the internet may not play well with the newest version of pfSense in doing this. So go ahead and just make sure that you understand that, okay? Now, if you do this, the first one that I was going to actually end up using here is one that's just an agree button. So it's a web page, it's an HTML page that has just a simple button on it that allows you to actually be able to say, hey, here's what it's going to look like, and here's what you do to click on it, and then it gives you access in. The second option, it actually brings you to a login page as well. And that login gives you that ability, again, to put a username and a password in there, and then be able to click that you agree to everything else too, and go ahead and use that as well. Okay, so that is all pretty much some of the things that you want to make sure that you understand as we get started. Now, for us, I just showed you that because it does end up being whatever your particular office chooses to do. Okay, so you can use the default one, or you can end up using, of course, well, the ones that are actually one that you create and you design. Okay, now the ones that I downloaded were a little bit of an earlier version of pfSense that it worked on. But on this one, it didn't work as well as I'd like it to, but I did want to let you know that if you do this, just make sure that it works. In other words, you test it out and see if it works. If that doesn't work, make sure you use the defaults and test out. If it works there, then you know it's your HTML page that's the problem that you have, okay? So let's go ahead and get it configured here, okay? So Zach, the first thing that we are going to do is, now here it is on pfSense. So I've already logged into the web configurator. I'm going to select services, okay? And we're going to select Captive Portal. So it's right here under Captive Portal. Looks fairly plain Jane, but there's a lot of information here that we're actually going to end up having to choose and see. So on the right-hand side, I'm going to click on the Add button. And when I click on the Add button, it's going to ask me for a zone name, okay? Now, you can actually create this for every single one of your interfaces if you choose to. So you can do it for every single LAN. So that's why it gives you options to do this, okay? But for me, this is going to be my captive portal, okay? And we're going to call this one for LAN. And then again, captive portal test for the LAN network, and click and save. All right, Zach, well, that kind of looks, well, fairly unimpressive at this point. Doesn't look like there's a lot of options. Did we just set all of this up? What do you think, Zach?
I think there's more to be done.
Okay, and you are correct. So this is actually relatively easy to get started, but there's a lot of selection that you might have to consider if this is something that you're going to be doing. So if we take a look, all I need to do is select this Enable checkbox, and now you see where the rest of the screen has now expanded out. If I kind of zoom out for a moment, you'll see there's actually quite a bit of information down here that we have to go through. Now, we're not going to actually kind of do every single one of these options here, but I will point out a few that may be important for us to consider. So once I get this, I want to select the interface that it's going to be on. So you can actually select any of these interfaces that appear here, okay, if you want to. I'm just going to select LAN because that's the one I'm actually ready to do. And then from that point, you have some of these options that are good for your network depending on the busyness of your network as well. So maximum concurrent connections from a single IP address. You, of course, can actually limit those connections to the captive portal if you want to, okay? That's all up to you. Idle timeout. If they're connecting through the captive portal, if they just connect and they don't do anything else, how long before you kick them off so that somebody else can also get through as well, okay?
Setting a limit,
Yep. Hard limit timeout, and that just says, hey, how long am I actually going to allow them to connect in and do this thing, okay? So if they're doing something like this, I can set it to something like 60 minutes or 90 minutes and just say, look, regardless of how far along that they are, it's going to just give them access to, let's say, for an hour if I wanted to, okay? And that may be really beneficial, especially on a very busy type of network if you're doing this for a wireless access, let's put it that way. Traffic quota, disconnected if exceeding this amount of traffic, as you see, and that includes upload and download speeds, so, or upload and download bandwidth, I guess, or, you know, chunks of data that you have. So if you actually choose this in terms of megabytes, once they hit that, it automatically drops them and they have to disconnect. So this way you can prevent somebody from streaming the entire day on your network if you want to, or maybe even from downloading a ton of material through your wireless access point, or through your, your firewall if you want to. Reset periods as well, login, pop-in windows. We're not so worried about all of this stuff, but you can go ahead and take a look at this as well. Notice concurrent user logins. You can even limit this instead of Zach being able to log into 6 different machines. You can disable that to where they're only allowed the most recent login per username will actually be active, and that will disconnect everybody else too. All right, now that we are here, we'll just use the default pages instead, and that's where we run into this section, which it says on the black bar here, captive portal login page, okay? So this is the one that I want to be able to use. So I'm going to enable the custom logo and click browse, and it's right here. I have my pfSense logo, and you can see it over here on the right above my head, and then click open, and that should log it in, and I should see it right here. And that's the only thing I'm actually going to do at this point to make sure that that works. And then the other one here is under terms and conditions. So I've already copied my terms and conditions to a file. And here's my terms and conditions file. And if I zoom in, you can see that this is more of anything else, right? Is the idea here of making sure we understand our liabilities and the usages here. By accepting this, you actually realize that this is, again, owned by the actual owner of the network here, and they can kick you off, block you, do whatever they want to, terminate you at any time for any particular reason they want to. You agree not to do anything illegal is the second option that I have here. And then third is provided as is, no warranties or anything else expressed or implied here is what we're taking a look at. All right, so that sounds good. I'm going to copy this and close that out. Simply open up my browser again, and under terms and conditions, I'm going to paste all that in there. All right, before I choose to use any authentication method, I just want a simple agreement. I click on authentication method and I select none, don't authenticate users. And then when I choose that, notice all the rest of that kind of goes away. From this point, I select save. Now at the bottom, you saw this kind of yellow bar there that was saying, hey, make sure that in DHCP, okay, that you have it configured and that your DNS servers are actually configured the way that they need to be. So let me go to my DHCP server, and here for the LAN network, which is the one that we're on, I want to make sure that as I go down here, that under the servers here, I want to select, well, my pfSense firewall here as the DNS server. This will allow me to resolve names internally in my network, as well as to forward traffic outside. As long as the unbound service is actually running, it should be able to do that for us, and that's the default one that's running. So that's what we want. And then, of course, the proper default gateway is also listed here too. And as far as lease times, mine is default here, about an hour. Maximum lease time, about 2 hours here. And from that point, we're going to leave the rest and simply click Save. Right here. Verify that the changes have been applied successfully, which is what we want.
And that's what it says.
Yep. And so that actually looks good at this particular point here. Okay. So now that all that is actually ready, let me check something here on the status. And nothing is actually connecting in, which is perfectly fine. Then if I go to, let's see, just want to make sure that I've got everything done the way that I think it should be. Okay. So now that the captive portal looks ready, let's see if we can actually connect to something here. So let's see if 8.8. So I'm just trying to get connected. I'm not really trying to do anything else here. But if I do 8.8.8.8 and get connected, you can see now where it actually says, hey, agree with the terms and services. If I'm not sure what they are, I click on this, and then it actually pastes it out here for me.
Oh, right.
Now, you can't really read that too much, but if I zoom in, even that's actually way across the page there. But you can see where it actually allows you to be able to read that right there. Then I click Login. And at this point here, it is going to take a moment. And hopefully, we should actually end up seeing it kind of connect and do what we need to. Okay. Now, before that happens, let's see how long it actually takes here for just a moment. Looks like it's taking its sweet time. Sometimes it does that. Now, underneath the status here on Captive Portal, it does show this. Okay. So this is how I know I am now actively connected. Okay. We see my IP address on this machine, and it says the MAC address. It says it's unauthenticated. And here's the start of the session for us. So if that is actually connected there, now let's see if I can kind of go over here. Let's just do itpro.tv. And there we are. We are now connected out to the internet, okay? And that actually allows me to get connected on through.
That's fantastic.
All right. So that is us, essentially doing the same thing here to make that actually end up working. Now, I don't know why it's taking so slow. Normally this ends up going away or it goes to another page that says you've been successful, but I didn't actually set that up. So that's probably why it's actually staying there for right now. All right. So that looks like it works, Zach.
Yeah.
The way that we actually said it was going to work. Okay. But let me disconnect our session here, okay, as well. Okay. When I disconnect the users at this point, this is what we want to do next. Now, what we want to do, Zach, is we want to go in and also try and set up the authentication part instead. So, Zach, this is where we've created you as a user.
Right.
And now, as a user, there's a couple of things that I wanted to make sure of. So here's Zach, and I actually have him in a couple of groups here. Captive Portal and Admins. If I click on the Edit button, you can see underneath this is where we want, which is Effective Privileges. Okay. We want to make sure that this is the option that is also here. Okay. So not so much the Captive Portal itself allows access to Captive Portal page. That actually does help, but this is the one itself. Indicates whether the user is able to log on or log into the Captive Portal. Okay. That is kind of the important one that we want to actually set up. So as long as the user has that, I'm going to click Save here just to verify that it is there. I go back to Services and Captive Portal, and this is where it becomes tricky with the Captive Portal service. Okay. For one reason or another, and I know because I've tested this out a couple of times here, okay, I cannot reuse this connection, okay? So if I want to set this one up for the login,
You have to start a fresh connection.
I have to go ahead and delete this one and then add a new one back in. I don't know why. It's just the way that it actually ends up working as well. So if I now do this as my captive portal test here, again, captive portal test. Actually, put a 2 here, just so that we know it's a different one that we just created. I save and continue. We're going to enable this. Select the LAN again this time. I'm not going to worry about setting up any of this stuff. And the other thing that I found out as well, my custom portal page that I went ahead and also ran, it apparently does not like the way that 2.4.4 or 2.4.4 as far as pfSense goes, doesn't like the way that my pfSense page was formatted or something. It will show up, but it doesn't tend to work, okay? So instead, we're going to just use the default one here instead. And when we do that, we use the default one. I'm not going to worry about even the custom logo or anything else here. The terms and conditions are still in my copy and paste here. On the authentication, we're going to use the back end this time and select the local database. Okay. Now remember, you do have the other option. If you have a remote access server and you have radius turned on, you can also do that as well. All right, and here's the reason why we need the captive portal login. As you see this right beside my face here, okay? Only allow users groups with captive portal login privilege set, okay? So we know that Zach's account has that as well.
Right.
And then one last option here that I wanted to point out, let me see if I can zoom above my head just a little bit, okay, is this one where it essentially tells us, like, when this is enabled here, as far as HTTPS, they will be transmitted essentially encrypted, okay, to protect against eavesdroppers. So if you're doing this over an open wireless network, such as at a coffee house or the idea of a fast food joint, you may choose to go ahead and enable this here, okay? In your building, though, if you're really not worried about that type of coverage where somebody could be eavesdropping or sniffing the traffic on your network, then I wouldn't worry about it at all. I'm just going to leave it simply in this way without having to worry about that, and click Save. All right, so now here is our second test, okay? Now at this point, if I go ahead and now I select a new tab, and we will try again. I'm just going to try and trigger it. I just like putting 8.8.8 because it's easy for me to remember. And then I do this. Now notice that the page has actually changed here instead. And now we see where it says pfSense and user. And then if I type in Zach, the password, and the terms and conditions again will be the same as the one that we had before. And then I click login. At this point, it is going to take a sweet time. I don't know why, but it could be just because of the way that it's working with my virtual machine and output and everything. But it's just taking its sweet time. But how do I know it's working? If I go back to pfSense Gamma, I can go to Status and Captive Portal, and I can see something, Zach. Okay?
Yeah.
You are currently logged in. Your session has started, which is actually key. And now that means that you are actually able to connect in, okay? So once I do that, once again, we can now choose itpro.tv. We should be able to log in there.
Good, that's where I wanted to go.
Yep, we can actually do something else. We can even do your other home site here, Facebook, if you choose to. So we can actually do that one as well. Maybe your Snapchat or your MySpace page.
IMDb.
We can actually get all there, yeah. So, oh yeah, that's true, your IMDb page. That would actually be good as well. So I didn't completely set up everything that kind of normally lets you go to what we call a redirect page all the way to where it actually says you successfully logged in, but you can actually see where that's working for us, okay? So Zach, that is us actually configuring the idea of Captive Portal.
Awesome.
If you choose, though, to end up, again, I would delete this one if you wanted to choose a different system again for that same interface. You can't continue to add in another one. I think for the same interface is not going to let you do that. But if you select that and instead, let's see here, I wanted to make sure I choose that. Notice that there's this option for vouchers, okay? And this is supposed to essentially create a voucher role. So it's just like the idea of a ticket roll, right, that you have, okay? So if Zach wanted to come into the fair and I was the one holding the tickets, I would just issue Zach a ticket, okay? Then he could present that back to my server. And that way it actually says, yes, I already have the the count of that ticket and I match it up, and if Zach has the right ticket, then Zach can actually be able to go through.
Certainly.
Now, I've done that. Like I said, it's worked sometimes, but then other times where I got a ticket that said I had a ticket, it didn't actually work. So I'm not saying it can't work now, but just kind of realize that this one may not be as consistent as what I'd like it to actually be able to be. Okay. So Zach, that's why I didn't really worry about that one. But we can see here where setting up a captive portal may be something that you choose to do, but it's all up to you, and it's all up to actually the way that you want to make sure that you get everything done as well. Okay. So Zach, that is a successful setup and a demonstration of using captive portal.
Thank you, Ronnie. pfSense Advanced Configure Captive Portal. Another wonderful episode. Ronnie, good job. He's done a wonderful job with every single episode of pfSense 2.4.4 Open Source Firewall. Make sure you watch all the episodes and take notes and do some additional studies. Keep studying, keep learning. Inside of our course library, there's a whole bunch of supplementary information, and it's there to do one thing, help you be even more successful. So check that out too. And tell everybody you know about IT Pro TV. IT Pro TV is binge-worthy. Thanks for watching. I'm Zach Memis.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.